Hi everyone, in this video I just want to have a look at some ways of thinking about scale while you're working on your projects in Blender. There's a few different ways to approach it, and generally I would say with most of these computational processes it can be difficult to start thinking about scale right in the first instance. It's more something that you will develop a sense of as you go through the process. But there are a few key ways of kind of visualizing it or addressing it in Blender, and a few key areas where we might change that sense of scale. So I guess beginning, we can look at the scene setup here, scene parameters here. We can see that we've got a units tab here, and we can have a look and see that our length is currently in meters. So generally you can pretty much just leave it in meters, and then if you want to work in millimeters, you're thinking more about like 0.001 equals 1 millimeter. If that becomes an issue, like if you're really needing to dial in millimeters fairly precisely, or you're needing to work at like points of a millimeter, which is fairly rare, but will happen sometimes, you can drop this length unit of measurement down to millimeters. Just be aware that that changes the whole scene's unit system. So now if I go to like type in a value to move this object a specific value, a specific distance, it's going to be in millimeters. So if I want to move this 1 meter over here, or 1 meter on the y-axis, I would have to type in GY 1000 to get 1 meter correctly, because it's now in millimeters. So just things to think about. I often will work in millimeters, or at least sometimes work in millimeters, but sometimes it's just much easier just to keep working in meters and then figure it out as you go. So the next place that just thinking about scale and how scale works in Blender is that and this is a little quirk of Blender's, is that the object itself has one scale, and you can find it in the object data properties here. And it's you can scale your object. So when you're scaling your object on the object level, it's scaling it in this box here. The problem with scaling things here is that this scale doesn't correctly represent the scale of the objects inside it. It's a multiplier, or a modifier essentially of the things that are inside it, rather than being an exact scale. So you generally want to be keeping your scale at 1 by 1 by 1, or x 1x 1y 1z, because that's the correct proportion of any object is scaled, proportionately, basically. A little confusing, but maybe I can demonstrate what I mean. So we bring this cube up here, and we know roughly that I think it's 2 by 2 meters. We can check that by turning on our edge length overlays, and we can see that it's a 2 by 2 meter cube. If I scale this cube down to, let's say I scale it down to 0.5, so that we know it's a 1 by 1 meter cube, and then I hit tab to enter edit mode, you can see I'm still at 2 meters. So if I exit edit mode, scale that up to 1 again, and then go back in, still 2 meters. If I scale in edit mode, you can see that the meters are changing. So I might scale this down by 0.5, and then I've got 1 by 1 by 1, and we go to object mode and we see that the scale is still proportionally even. So that's just something to be aware of when you're scaling kind of inside and outside of edit mode. And this brings me to another really handy point, is that, yeah, you can turn on edge length measurements. So you can have a good idea of the scale of your object. This is probably the easiest way of kind of considering scale, is by having a box, basically, that you know the exact measurements of, and you can try and fit or use that as a scale reference within within your file. So having kind of a 1 by 1 meter box would be fairly helpful. and then thinking about at the prototyping stage that would be scaled down to like a 10 by 10 centimeter box, so scaled down by 100. Yeah, cool. So the next thing is like, okay, well, maybe if I can, if I can get this edge length here and I can display it and I can change it, like, is there a way of resizing it easily? And the unfortunate answer is no. In Blender, there's not really too many ways of accurately resizing that edge unless you kind of start to really go hard on kind of setting up your snaps and your grid snaps and things like that, and you scale the world to millimeters, and even then it's going to be kind of difficult. So one tool that I found that was really easy to use is the edge resizer tool. So you can find this is off I found it on a Blender forum ages ago. I've put it up here on the under the resources tab. You can download that and install it in Blender like any other add-on. And it will allow you to, well, let's have a look. We'll go into edge mode, and maybe we'll select these edges here, kind of edge ring there, and then we can go up into edge resize. I tend to right click and click on add to quick favorites, which means I can then hit Q and select edge resize from from my quick favorites menu. Really handy, that the quick favorites menu. So now that I've done that, I can go into the edge resize length here and type in, I want to make that now, say 2 meters, or I want to make it 13 millimeters, which would be 0.013? No, 0.013. Yeah. I think, yeah. So yeah, you can really use the edge resize tool to get very accurate measurements. Just be aware that the quirks of having polygons and edges and stuff floating in free space still apply. So you want to just kind of like be cautious about how you use this and not try and like build anything of I guess like important manufacturing quality with that method. It's going to be much easier to go into something like Rhino, something like Fusion, and do some sketch-based modeling instead. But it works in a pinch. It's really handy in a pinch for just making sure that you are working at the correct scale. So the final thing I'd like to point out with scale is that when you're exporting an STL file from Blender, it can tend, basically it exports things at, with the idea that meters in Blender equals millimeters in everywhere else, which is strange, but that's just what it does. The consequence of that is that whenever you export an STL file, when you import it into some other software, if you've been working at the correct scale, or if you're working at a scale of like, 1 millimeter equals 1 millimeter, or 1 meter equals 1 meter, when you import it into another software, it's going to be 1,000 times smaller than it should be. So the trick there, I guess, and maybe I'll just demonstrate that just so that you know, one, how to export, and two, how to import into something else. And you can see the issue. So if I go into export STL, what I'm going to do is check selection only, because I don't want to export everything else in the scene. Leave the scale as it is, apply the modifiers so that I know that like my subsurface modifiers and things are being applied. And then I'm just going to save that to my desktop. I will call it tessellation. Cool. So we'll save that to my desktop, and then open Rhino and have a look at it in Rhino. Okay, so we're in Rhino. I'm going to import my STL file, tessellation. Just leave that as is and hit OK. And yeah, you can see here that our object is very, very small in the middle of the scene. So small, in fact, let's have a look at top view. So we'll make sure we're in orthographic view. I'm going to select my polyline tool here, and I'm just going to turn off grid snap by clicking this little thing down here, this grid snap button. And I'm just going to click and click to just get, and then I'm going to right click, and that'll give me a line here that I can then select and type length. And that will give me 3.4 millimeters, so definitely way too small, 3.4 millimeters. So what are we going to do to deal with that? We want to make sure that the stuff that's in Blender we're exporting at the same at a scale that we know kind of logically is the same as what it is in Blender. So let's jump back into Blender, and we'll go to File, Export, STL, and we just want to go to scene scale and crank that all the way up to 1000, and then hit export. Now we should be able to see that at the proper size. There we go, open. Okay, and yeah, if we zoom out, we'll see that, yeah, nice. We're a lot bigger now. If we grab our polyline tool again and click a couple times, right click, select this line, type length. You can see it typing up in the command menu there. You don't have to select the command menu, just start typing. Type in length, and that's going to give us a length of 3 meters, which is obviously too big, but you'll be able to now figure out what that scale is.